Charu, thank you for coming in today. You have this really remarkable history and narrative of, doing transformational research, and which was recognized. You've written papers, you've been interviewed by top media because of your work. You were in the top two in the Imagine Cup, this contest that Microsoft has globally, where there's been like 20 million participants, and it's really hard to get to being the top, and you were. And I guess that was in 2017, and then from there you launched this company, and then you changed its name, and now you just raised this amazing round. So we want to mine all of that narrative since we last talked. So again, congratulations, you just went public on your raising this Series A round, which is a big step, by the way, from pre-seed to seed to Series A. So, and you get some great investors as well. So anyways, thank you for coming in. Really exciting, all of the things that you've been involved with. So
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share a little bit more about our story and our vision for human-centered automation. It's been amazing to have you in our corner this whole time, and so really appreciate the opportunity.
So let's do a little bit of catch up. First of all, you're really sort of embedded in the U.S. and particularly in Arkansas, and that's where you founded a lot of the initiatives you have. And I know you've been involved in some of the summits or activities there. Can we do a bit of catch up of how you're impacting that community, and you're leading innovation and so on, and then we'll broaden the story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. First off, I'm very thrilled to be a part of the Northwest Arkansas community. I like to joke that when I first moved to Arkansas, I didn't really know where it was on a map, which unfortunately isn't too much of a joke. It was actually pretty close to reality. I'm originally was born in Australia and grew up in Atlanta for most of my life. Went to college in Atlanta as well at Georgia Tech's #1 ranked industrial engineering program. And about 3.5 or 4 years ago, I had this opportunity to come to Northwest Arkansas to be a part of a startup accelerator focused on retail and supply chain. And so it's a really unique opportunity. So I pretty much packed up all my things and drove 11 hours and ended up, staying, which was really, really exciting. But there's a couple things that make Northwest Arkansas a very unique community. One, it is the headquarters of 3 Fortune 500 enterprises really focused on retail and supply chain: Walmart, Tyson, and JB Hunt. And there's also 1,300 suppliers and vendors that support them. Second, it's also top 10 in terms of places to live, according to US World News. Incredible affordability, amazing art museums, the best mountain biking trails in the world. And third, last but definitely not least, the people and the culture here are absolutely infectious, just really, really kind, supportive. We have a little bit of the Southern hospitality, which is great. And so it just was a great place to start our company Ox, where we build human-centered automation technology across supply chain and retail operations.
And you've been invited to be like keynotes at their summits and things like that, right? And isn't that remarkable? Like, you're still quite young, and then you're leading conferences and things. So can you describe what that is about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a lot of fun. So actually just maybe a week or two ago, I was the keynote at the Heartland Challenge, which is an entrepreneurship competition put on by the University of Arkansas, where they invite multiple student entrepreneurs from across the US, even globally, I believe. There's international teams as well. And they give away $100,000 in non-dilutive funding. So I actually, as soon as I got on the stage, I kind of had mentioned that, this was exactly where I started just 4 years ago. I was in college, and at the time, was an aspiring entrepreneur and had won a little bit of money from entrepreneurship competitions like the Microsoft Imagine Cup, like Atlanta Startup Battle, that actually helped us get our business off the ground. So I know from firsthand experience how important some of those opportunities are. And it was really incredible to kind of come full circle and have that opportunity to keynote. Another one that I just was at recently was this event put on about inventory by the University of Arkansas School of Supply Chain, as well as Plug and Play, a local ecosystem builder here, an incubator. And that was really incredible. I actually won an award. I didn't even know about it at the time, but they had surprised me with the inaugural Innovation Award, named after Dean Matt Waller, the dean of the Sam Walton College of Business. So it was amazing. We've obviously been a huge fan of Dean Waller and what he's done for the community here in Northwest Arkansas for quite a while. He's one of our closest friends. He actually had me on his podcast, Be Epic, maybe 6 or 8 months ago. And so really, really incredible to have that opportunity and get that award. It was quite a shock, and I can't take credit for any of it. I mean, we have an absolutely world-class team that really deserves all the credit because they're the ones who are working hard every single day to make sure that our operators are taken care of.
So before we get into Ox and the founding of Ox and what you're doing with Ox, let's get into, what created all of this success. I mean, you were a successful student, you went to grad school, you're successful there, and then you're successful in the Imagine Cup, and then you successfully did a startup. I mean, what are those attributes? What are the recommendations you want to make to the audience for those people who want to say, what magic power does Charu have? And I want some of it.
Well, first off, that is like quite thoughtful of you to say and very kind. I'm not sure I would fully agree. There's definitely a lot of, again, people that we have in our corner that I think that's one of the most important things is having an incredible network of people, friends, supporters, teammates, investors that are behind you. That just means the absolute world. But in terms of personal qualities, I think our core values at Ox tend to describe what I think are some of the most important qualities that we can develop as humans. And of course, some of us might have strengths in certain areas versus others, but I think these are really good values to kind of grow into and continue to learn from. So our core values, we call them the Tiger values. They stand for truth, initiative, growth, energy, and relevance. So of course, truth is the first one. I think curiosity, seeking to understand before, listening more than you talk. Those are really, really important. There's so much that people from all walks of life can teach you if you just listen. So I think starting from there with that curiosity is really, really key. The second one, initiative, being self-motivated, being a self-starter, sometimes seeing things that don't exist yet can be really, really important, especially as an entrepreneur. The third one, growth, it's about multiplying your value. So each day, compounding interest, right? Like that's kind of the key to life, in my opinion, and building the right blocks and habits that you can basically do every single day that get you closer and closer to that goal, that ultimate vision that is at the end of the tunnel. Energy, basically maintaining a positive attitude, assuming positive intent and optimism. I actually think that there's a mathematical reason why it works pretty well, which I won't get into here, but I do believe that, again, assuming that everyone has your best interests at heart, unless proven otherwise, of course, but most, as a baseline, can go really, really far. And being optimistic about what is in your control versus what's out of your control. So separating out kind of the locus of control and then making sure that you're driving forwards towards that ultimate vision. And of course, the last one is relevance, which is really about focus. And again, seeing that vision very clearly and always doing actions that contribute specifically to that vision, pretty much cutting everything else out. So I think those are pretty good values. They're things that I've definitely leaned on quite a bit as I've, tried to grow and evolve. And I still obviously have quite a few, miles and miles to go. And that's why I'm so grateful to have supportive people around me every single day that can continue to hold me accountable to those goals.
Yeah, I've been around for a long time, so that those values resonate. The side. I mean, truth, right? And sort of speaking to the truth. I guess being authentic, and
Right.
that makes a difference. And then this idea of having initiative, and maybe there's this idea of grit.
Of course.
So it ties into this sort of initiative, and I guess perseverance tied in with that initiative. And
absolutely. Yeah.
And then you talk about growth and, sort of pushing the boundaries related to that, but being optimistic about it as well, and being, driving forward through those growth initiatives.
Mm.
And I guess part of that growth is also having empathy for others and
Absolutely.
be,
Yeah.
being inclusive and having diverse ideas in your growth
Hmm.
strategy. And then you talk about relevance, and that's really key, right? It's got to be something that makes sense and it's relevant to the different conversations that you're engaged in. And but be mindful and be open to opportunity and
Right.
diverse ways of thinking, even when you're doing the relevance part as well. So, hey, that resonates with me. I'll remember that. I'll mention that in some future interviews I do or in keynotes and things that I do. So I like that.
Wow. Thank you, Stephen. That means a lot.
Well, it's a nice acronym, Tiger, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We like to joke at Ox that we love animals, So yeah.
So let's talk about Ox. Now you had another name before Ox and then became Ox, and then can you talk about that naming strategy, and then we'll look at your Ox journey to this Series A funding round that you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is kind of a funny story. So in the very beginning, Ox was called Oculogics, and the way that name came about was, well, candidly, I was an engineering student and I love math. So, log of X, the logistic function, X, all that stuff. I wanted to kind of incorporate that into the name. Um, and so I thought it was a great name for a while. But unfortunately, most people can't write it or spell it or say it well. So it wasn't the best name, honestly, at the end of the day. And so actually, I ended up having this opportunity to I was a finalist for a really prestigious, fellowship. And the person who was basically putting on the fellowship, his name's Peter Thiel. He's a pretty prominent entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. Started PayPal, Palantir, and just very well respected individual in technology. And he was there at the summit and was speaking to us in kind of a fireside chat format. And it was probably like 30, 40 people. So it was pretty small, which was really nice, very intimate. And he kind of gave us some insight into his journey starting PayPal. And he made a little bit of a joke. He said, I think the reason that PayPal won is because we were named PayPal. PayPal's not very intimidating. It sounds really friendly, and one of the biggest challenges that they had at the time was, again, transferring money on the internet was scary, right? So having a name that kind of instilled this vote of confidence, this friendliness, really, really helped them out. And so I kind of took that away, and of course, at the time, no one could say Oculogics, and so we basically dropped most of it and took the O and the X and put them together as Ox. And ox is one of the strongest animals in the world, right? And in some senses is one of the earliest forms of automation as well. So there were quite a few, subtle meanings within the reason we picked the name Ox. And then I think the last one that actually at the time wasn't necessarily planned, but ended up working out really well was, again, our entire vision is centered on exciting and engaging frontline operators. And so Ox ultimately stands for operator experience. And I mean, yeah, that's exactly why we exist. So we wanted to make sure that it was represented in the name.
Let's see if I can remember this thread here. It's oculogic, and then you attend this sort of a fireside chat, and the success of PayPal is the name, and that inspires you to think, hey, I got to choose something that's a little bit shorter. So you choose Ox, and Ox has this sort of automation aspect associated with it, maybe 10,000 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
Kind of like foundation to humanity, and
Right.
then you think, well, let's say operator experience, or you're really amplifying that operator experience with this human-centered automation company. And so you can see how it's really quite appropriate. So let's talk about this human-centered automation using wearable technology. And you earlier talked about frontline operators and how you're going to enable them, you're going to empower them, right? You're going to augment them in some way through software intelligence. So what does that look like? Like, let's say I'm a enterprise and I have warehousing or something like that. And then I think, gee, my people are doing this in such a way. What's the onboarding process of getting them automated?
Yeah, great question. So human-centered automation is wearable technology that directs frontline operators through artificial intelligence. The current as-is state is we have managers in warehouses or distribution centers, fulfillment centers, and they're exporting orders from their warehouse management system or order management system into Excel in some sort of effort to prioritize them. Then they're printing out hundreds upon thousands of pieces of paper in order to assign a specific operator to a particular task. And then finally, when the operators are on the floor, they're leveraging devices that are 20 years old, where they have to press multiple function keys to execute basic tasks. For instance, shorting an item. So at Ox, what we've done is we've created the next generation operator experience. Work is fully autonomous, meaning there's no more manual planning of tasks at all. It's all handled directly through artificial intelligence. It's also completely digital, removing every piece of paper that used to be a part of the process. And finally, we provide one single operator experience across any device, whether it's smart glasses, a wrist-worn scanner, ring scanner, smartwatches, or traditional mobile devices. So it's been a lot of, fun, really implementing the technology. Our technology is the only automation that can be deployed at scale within 12 weeks that offers a payback period 3 times faster than traditional forms of mechanical automation. And the reason we can do that is because we're implementing software, not big hardware, conveyor, mechanical systems that's pretty traditional in these types of environments. So it takes about 8 to 12 weeks. We're very industrial engineering driven, so we like to see the data that we can give significant gains in efficiency just through software. And that's essentially how we implement our technology.
So you can help in the supply chain and retail. It's really sort of like at the back end that drives these enterprises, right? And you can automate all of those operations in the back end. And
Yeah.
and you say you can do it in 12 weeks. There's this generative or foundational models, which then generative AI is just part of that, but there's other models like the fusion models and so on. What impact will that have on the type of software intelligence that you're bringing to play?
Yeah, absolutely. Artificial intelligence is one of the most compelling and exciting fields to be a part of. I mean, it's just shocking the pace of innovation, and just personally, one of my interests is sort of related to AI alignment and making sure that we give or we have the right systems and tools in place to make sure that we can get the best out of AI and AI doesn't kill us all, which is definitely possible, So not to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer or anything, but that's just a personal interest of mine. In terms of the effect that generative AI will have across the supply chain, I think like large language models, a lot of people see them, kind of in consumer applications like GPT-3 and 4. However, I mean, I think that there's lots of opportunity and how they can be leveraged directly in the supply chain. So one specific example is with packing. So, I mean, there probably is a little bit of validation that needs to be done to really get them into the state where they're applicable. But I mean, I've been pretty impressed by some of the results. I know, Stephen, you and I have talked in the past about the Sparks of AGI paper that Microsoft released a little while ago, and just seeing the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4. It's pretty incredible. And again, the pace of development has been insane. So we're very excited to be able to leverage the best in class technologies at Ox and give them to the operators directly. And that's, again, one of the great value propositions of leveraging our technology, because you get access to some of the best in class technologies immediately across the entire operation.
So now this is for the technical people in my audience. So what's your tech stack look like?
Yeah, so we are a JavaScript, Node.js. Our intelligence is actually built primarily in Python. So we do a little bit of everything. In terms of the cloud provider we leverage, Google Cloud Platform. Actually, there's a sort of strategic reason for that. Since we work with a lot of retail and supply chain companies, AWS is a little bit off limits for a couple of them. And so GCP or Microsoft are really the only choices. But yeah, we've been pretty happy with GCP. In terms of databases, we use Postgres. I think that's a pretty decent, or hopefully that's a pretty somewhat end-to-end summary. Grafana, so some observability stuff, of course. Yeah. Those are the things that come to mind at top of mind, at least.
And then on the wearables, what does that tech sort of look like?
Yeah, so we leverage any mobile or wearable device. So smart glasses, wrist-worn scanners, watches, ring scanners, traditional mobile devices. We can deploy on any of those.
And your team is what, about 40, 50 people now, right?
Yeah, we're about 40 people. So over the past 18 months, or maybe 24 months, we've grown from, I think, 4 at the seed round to now 40.
Now, again, there's entrepreneurial minded people in the audience. And so they want to hear your story where you went from idea to proof of concept to pilot to implementation, where you're starting to scale within an enterprise and then across many enterprises. From your pre-seed round or angel investing, I guess, friends and family, angel, pre-seed, seed, and now Series A. Can you describe some of the lessons you learned and what that journey was like?
Oh man, absolutely. I mean, it's really hard to compress so much, that 4 years or so into a short blip. But I mean, it's been an incredible process. I feel like one of the biggest things that I've taken from it is just how much I've learned about myself and about the, again, absolutely incredible people that we've surrounded ourselves with. And that's been so enlightening. I think that's one of the things that I'm most proud of. So, at the beginning, from the proof, I think like really, at the beginning, it started in the research phase. And the reason I started with research is because I really wanted to learn the technology from the ground up. And I think that was really valuable for me. I'm an engineer, product type minded person. So really the thing that's most compelling is building a technology specifically that changes the world. And so I kind of got started in that realm. Did quite a few research studies at my lab at Georgia Tech, which was under Thad Starner, the creator of Google Glass. And at the time, I was also in the industrial engineering school. So graduated from their top ranked industrial engineering program. Actually, the genesis of finding the problem started when I worked in my first job at a warehouse. And I was basically tasked with deploying these automated storage and retrieval systems across the supply chain. And the big insight was it costs millions of dollars and it takes many years to get to scale. So that, it was pretty incredible to see the efficiency gains, but at the same time, it was quite mechanical and slow. And so it kind of prompted me to think about lower infrastructure forms of automation, which is what led us to human-centered automation. So as soon as I was, kind of keyed in on the problem, decided to do some research in wearable computing, worked with the inventor of Google Glass, published that work internationally, won best paper. After that, when I graduated, soon after, I essentially moved to Northwest Arkansas because I basically realized that I learned how to do research, but I didn't know how to be an entrepreneur. And that was the next step that I really wanted to learn. And I think that another takeaway was, from research, the way I became a good researcher was by working with excellent world-class researchers. So, being surrounded by someone like that who could basically hone my ideas and mentor me to become who I wanted to be. And so I kind of took a similar approach. That's why I actually went to the Startup Accelerator, because I wanted to learn how to be an entrepreneur and was surrounded by just these. It was actually crazy. I remember walking into the rooms and having a backpack because I just, graduated from college and being a peer to vice presidents, senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents at some of the largest companies in the world. And so that was a very unique experience and something I was so grateful for, like really having the opportunity to meet these people, rub elbows, and ultimately, pilot and deploy the technology, which is really cool. So from there, we kind of switched into more of the pilot and proof of concept phase, which was, again, through the connections through either the accelerator program or just through the network that we had built over a little while, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, or maybe 2-ish years at that point. We ended up signing our first customers, and these were kind of limited deployments with a couple of operators. But really the focus was making sure that the technology worked in a live environment, not just in research, and with a real customer. And so yeah, deploying technology in the wild for the first time is quite a challenge, it does push you to think about things that you never would anticipate otherwise. So security, for instance, scalability, um, operationalization, like all of these are challenges that I'd never faced before and really didn't know much about. So very unique, but also very, very insightful. And after we were able to basically prove that our business case made sense, so, again, we could save millions of dollars per facility per year, and it was live, functioning, fully technically integrated into the environment. The operators were using it on a day-to-day basis. We were able to essentially scale it. So instead of having it in one facility, it's in tens or hundreds of facilities pretty much instantaneously. And so that's, again, one of the benefits of having a software driven business is once you kind of figure out the hard part, you can scale that one best way across multiple different environments and hundreds of operators at once. So yeah, that was kind of the last piece of the puzzle. And of course, this next journey is going from, a handful of customers and hundreds of operators to tens of thousands of operators. And so that's going to be the next hurdle to cross. But I'm really excited by the absolutely incredible team that we've built in service of the mission and the vision. Actually, one of our executives, so again, I think like along this path, you meet a lot of people and learn a lot from people who've kind of been in that place before. And so I think there's so many different people that I can kind of call out as very, very helpful across each one of those stages. So, of course, in the research stage, it was my advisor, Thad Starner, who taught me how to be an incredible researcher, And then in the proof of concept and pilot phase, it was really having the buy-in from some visionary customers who were willing to kind of take a bet on a young company. And I mean, there's so much gratitude that we have for our first customers and first users and first operators for their patience, their support, their insight into our roadmap and what we could build. And yeah, like it's just been so impactful. And then of course there's the team that we've built alongside of that. So our COO, Brent Sperry, he's a former tech operations executive from Walmart, where he deployed over 1 million devices across stores and distribution centers. And actually when we were looking to hire him, I had actually emailed his old boss, who's the head of store systems at Home Depot, really, really prominent executive in retail and supply chain. We messaged him and said, "What do you think about Brent?" And he said, "Hire him. The man's a genius." And I mean, he was absolutely right, So most of the, I think, the journey is really finding the best possible people that you can get around the table and essentially giving them the keys and having them teach you, and really like being a student of their expertise. So yeah, very thrilled to be a part of, this entire journey and just to have such an incredible team and group of investors around us. I think one more thought, I guess, like for this next phase, again, scaling the technology to tens of thousands of operators provides a really unique and exciting challenge for us. And that's why I'm so thrilled to have the support of our newest board member. Her name is Susan Line, and she is an absolutely iconic operator. She is the managing partner at BBG Ventures, one of the largest early stage female focused funds in the United States. And prior to that, she was the president of ABC Entertainment. She was the CEO of Gilt.com, Gilt Group, and Martha Stewart Omni Media. And she was on the board of directors of GoPro and AOL Brand Group. So she knows how to scale organizations, how to build the right structures, and to make sure that we're set up for success. So I've already learned an immense amount from Susan in such a short period of time, and I know I'm going to learn even more. So I'm really thrilled to see what the near future holds for us, especially under her tutelage and mentorship.
Well, you definitely have a great class of investors, such as Mac Venture Capital, BBG, which you already mentioned, and then Steve Case's Revolution. So that's kind of like a dream team of
Yeah,
investors, right?
absolutely. Yeah. No, we are so grateful to our investors for believing in our vision. And, yeah, Steve Case is a great example. I was actually at the Rise of the Rest CEO Summit just a couple weeks ago where I was speaking, and Steve was there, and it was, 60 of it was kind of an invite only event with 60 of their portfolio CEOs and founders. Really incredible time. And Steve has been an amazing supporter of ours, since the beginning, honestly. Rise of the Rest and Revolution have been in our company since the seed round, reinvested in the Series A, have been a part of every financing. So we're really grateful for them and for their belief in our vision.
So you have scaling capital, right? I mean, you got 16 million, which you announced yesterday, and venture funding. And really, when you get Series A, that allows you to start scaling the operation even more so than you're doing now. So what are your plans in the use of that capital and that scaling that you plan in the next year, 2 years, and 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest focus is again growing the team to make sure that we can address the mounting demand for human-centered automation. So we're really focused on scaling our sales and our engineering team primarily. And of course, the operations will definitely follow suit as well. So it's been a lot of fun, and we have quite ambitious plans, but we need the right, we're so grateful to kind of have these resources and this backing behind us to maximize our probability of success.
And then what are your plans from an exit standpoint? Yeah, you're hoping for an M&A at some point, or doing some kind of IPO in your journey, or what is that, or maybe keeping it private? What's your journey?
Yeah, so for me personally, my biggest focus is again the operators, right? Our company really comes down to the operator experience. And so we want to make sure that that's as effective, as efficient, as engaging as possible. And we want to get our technology in as many hands as possible. So in terms of the exit strategy, there's many different ways to go do that. And of course, a little bit is dependent on the market dynamics at the time and, things like that. So for instance, right now, the IPO market's a little bit questionable. And, so there's a lot of macro environment variables that tend to kind of impact those types of decisions. I'm not necessarily tied to any one of those necessarily. Like, I think there's a world in which an acquisition might make the most sense because it gets us to scale you know, the technology faster than we would otherwise. So that's maybe one option. The public option is a really great one, in my opinion, because it enables us to kind of get the capital from retail. But, actually, it's really even funny. Like I've gotten requests, from retail investors who've asked, hey, have you considered taking this, to a retail market? We're not there yet, obviously. Like there's quite a few, the SEC has regulations for some reasons, so which we all have opinions and about that, but like the SEC does have like regulations for a reason. So we'd have to definitely meet their requirements and go through the proper IPO process. I know historically there's also been kind of the SPAC, I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but that approach, which maybe hasn't been as successful that we've seen over the past 2 years, but was really, really popular kind of at the height of venture funding, 2021. So it's been really interesting to kind of see the market evolve. I think ultimately our goal is to get our technology in as many hands as possible. And whichever option does that is going to be the option that we take.
So in your personal journey, you had a series of successes, right? Both from an academic standpoint, and then winning all of these contests, and then being featured as a speaker at these marvelous conferences, and you're the North Star for people out there. And you're now doing interviews like the Wall Street Journal. You did one, New York Times, Business Insider, Forbes, and that spotlight's going to continue to grow. As your profile grows and you get more of these things, are there some lessons that you want to share with the audience? So that's kind of one sort of area or question. And then the other is you personally. Are you going to continue this serial entrepreneurship journey, and then maybe then pivot to being like an investor or something like that? Like what's your personal journey going to look at? Maybe you'll end up in politics or something, or leadership.
Oh, God. Wow. Well, first off, Stephen, that means a lot. Thank you so much. I mean, just to kind of to hear from you and to, have your faith of being able to kind of evolve and change. I really don't know what the future holds for me personally. I think right now, the biggest focus again is making sure that our technology gets in as many hands as possible. I'm so passionate about our vision for human-centered automation, and I really do think that we have a very unique opportunity ahead of us. So that's the most important thing for me right now. However, that being said, I'm a very curious person, and I like trying new things and learning about a lot of different fields. So I'm not sure. I've never really necessarily actively considered, politics, for instance, just because I think that there's other ways to kind of make an impact, maybe faster. And so, so that's maybe my opinion on that one. But again, I'm not going to discount it. Like maybe it could happen. I think it's kind of low probability, but it could happen. Who knows? The investor route, that's a funny one because I think when I first started the company, and to a certain extent, I still kind of do feel like the investors are the dark side. I hate to say it. I'm sorry to any investors like yourself and anyone who's listening that might hear me say that. But so I think, from that standpoint, I don't think I necessarily see myself in in those shoes just because yeah, I think that there's a lot of impact that I could make just kind of operating, doing things, building new technologies. And I'm really, really passionate about kind of the technology itself. And I think you don't really have that kind of level of control or that insight if you're at the seat of an investor. So of course, I'm not going to completely discount it and say it's never going to happen. Who knows? But at this point, also somewhat low probability, maybe a little higher probability than the politics one. But yeah, I think again, one of the again, I'm just so grateful to have many opportunities to learn from so many unique people, and I think that the journey is going to continue to evolve. So I'm excited to see where it takes me, and I'm open to many different opportunities. But right now, the biggest focus again is just making sure that our technology and our capabilities, and we're really able to support the operators at the end of the day. And there's so many things that I want to implement, kind of in the medium to long term that I think will really help that and really change the economic relationship that operators have with automation. So yeah, bringing the power back is really, really meaningful to me. And yeah, so I think that's point number one to answer your second question. And then to answer your first one about, you know, advice on media, I think media is an interesting one. We've never really actively approached any media. I never paid for like Forbes or Wall Street Journal or anything. I think they just found out about us through the internet. So it's been really amazing to kind of have those opportunities to share our story on a more public venue than we've ever had before. And I'm really grateful for those opportunities. But I think like, a lot of founders or a lot of investors kind of say that, if you focus on the right things, which is building a meaningful business that really resonates, then those things will come by default. And so I think that's kind of my approach is, it's nice. It is really nice and really, again, appreciate the venue. But the most important thing is making sure that we are being as effective as we possibly can. And hopefully the other things may or may not come. I mean, I think at first when I was, maybe younger in my career, and I'm still, I'm 25, so it's not like I'm really far into it or anything, but so, lots to learn and lots to grow on. But I think, early on in my career, I think I would have seen stuff like this and just been so thrilled and excited and, happy to kind of have the recognition. But I think there's a point where it's just like, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, and it's like, it's cool, I guess. And, it's nice to have, but like, that's not really the end, that's not really what matters. What matters is making an impact. And so that's what I care the most about.
I mean, you definitely are having impact, and you have your mind space in that area. I mean, you've been a strong advocate of social awareness summits and bringing people together to address some of the big challenges and opportunities, but from an social impact standpoint. So that's kind of maybe my second to last question. So, what are your plans from the impact side? And I know you were planning a sort of like a summit in your region, and you've done an African one earlier, which is about empowerment, enablement, diversity, inclusion, equity, and addressing again in a positive way some of the challenges that are in the world today. What are your plans on that arc, your story arc?
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen, thank you so much for being such a core part of that initiative. I think you have such a unique uh perspective to really bring to the table. And so that's why it's been so valuable to be able to have you in our corner and to bounce ideas off you and have your support. Really that the focus of, kind of that element is really around three themes: sustainability, technology and automation, and emerging markets. I know they're pretty broad, but I think that, they're some of the most important problems that we have facing our society today. And so I also believe that, you and I and quite a few others who have kind of been, have their hands in the pot for this initiative, we have such a unique ability to bring together the top of the top in all of these fields, and to really have a very unique and exciting event where we could build connections that otherwise wouldn't have been made. So yeah, it's been a little bit on the back burner for me recently, just because, again, you've seen how my focus has been really on the business and making sure that we're able to kind of get to our goals as effectively as possible. But now that I have a little bit more space and breathing room, I'm very excited to continue to kind of develop that and make sure that we get all the right people in the room together. So thank you so much for your support and for being a core part of it.
I can see the sort of the confluence or the amalgamation of your tiger philosophy, and then setting the future of vision in terms of impact in a positive way, and the S's for that sustainability aspect, and of course the E&T as you described it, right? Emerging markets and technology. So, and then of course within the tiger, ultimately as a foundation of driving everything in a positive way. So my last question is, what are your recommendations to the audience?
Yeah. First off, I really appreciate the opportunity to share our story. So thank you for listening, and, welcome any feedback or insights that you all have. In terms of feedback that I have for the audience, I think maybe, kind of a final note, especially given the current macroeconomic environment, hopefully this resonates, is you can't control the weather. So I know that there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's really stressful for quite a few people. For me personally, and I think for people in my generation, Gen Z, it's really shocking because a lot of us came into the world and into the workforce, and COVID hit, and, you know, the economy, like there's quite a few macro things that are happening, the war, right? Like, so many things are happening that are very stressful and candidly traumatic for most people, for quite a few people, unfortunately. And so I think the first thing is, you know sending love and supporting those that are in situations that are closer to those challenges, so that's one. And like realizing how connected we are, that's another piece of it. But I think the second piece of it is focusing on what's in your control. So you and I, we might not have direct control over the pandemic. We might not have direct control over the interest rates or the economy or inflation, consumer price index, whatever, or the war. But and those things are percolating down and impacting our day-to-day life, whether we like it or not. Um, but I kind of think of like entrepreneurship and startups as like you're driving a car, you have your destination, which is the vision, and you know where you're going, and the capital or the resources, the people, that's the gas, that's the fuel that you really need to get to that destination. And, maybe 18 months ago, it was really sunny. But now it's thunderstorming and there's tornadoes, and you're on this like mountainous path, right? So just the risk profile of what it takes today is very different than 18 months ago. In fact, just a couple days ago, I was reading this report from the National Venture Capital Association, the NVCA, and it said that this past quarter, so 2023 Q1, was the lowest amount of capital deployed across early stage startups over the past 11 quarters. So that's the data that really, kind of proves the point, right? We do live in a different world today than we did 18 months ago, especially from a financing perspective. And another data point, this is more anecdotal, but I have a friend who's the managing director of a fund. Their frequency of investments went from about 8 a month to 2 a month. And about 70%, she says, so again, anecdotal, of those deals are either down rounds or flat rounds. So we're really seeing kind of the impacts of the hype cycle evolve, in front of our eyes. And so, but again, you can't control the weather. I think the biggest thing is, you might change how you're driving, right? You might want to be more conservative on your gas and like how you kind of address getting to that destination, or you might stop a little bit earlier and get some gas somewhere else, right? So I think just being more flexible, given the state of the world, is really, really important, and just focusing on what you can control instead of the things that are daunting and somewhat out of our control.
I mean, the world is definitely requires agility.
Right. Yeah.
You have to be dynamic and look at it from an agile standpoint. So you got to be
Absolutely.
flexible in your thinking, right? And which you are.
Yes.
So
thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.
so Charu, thank you for coming in and just the marvelous work you're doing. And we'll continue to follow your progress and the impact you're having both on the commerce side, on the leadership side, and many, many domains, and also on the impact side. So again, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.